Hi everyone, it's Coach Fred here today, and I'm doing part 2 of word problems with linear functions. You're still on that same note sheet. Now there's going to be 3 types of problems that I'm looking at today. One that involves like a constant rate or speed, so one that's you're given a slope. And a relationship between two variables. So you're really given a slope, but you're also given a point. When it says a relationship between two variables, you're going to have to turn those variables into points. You could also be given 2 relationships at different points in time between variables. That means you're going to be given 2 points. And then the last one is when a word problem involves a constant rate or speed, so a slope and a beginning amount. So you're going to be using slope-intercept form to write those equations. But these 2, I'm going to probably suggest you write them in point-slope form. Why? Because you're going to be given a point and a slope, or 2 points, and you can get the slope. All right, so let's look at what I mean. All right. So we're going to start up our first one. When a word problem involves a constant rate or speed, so that's going to be our slope, and we're going to be looking for words that tell me that, and a relationship at some point in time between each variables. Okay, so let's read the question. Marty is spending money at the average rate of $3 per day. So that word average rate already is telling me constant rate, same rate, so my slope is going to be 3. After 14 days, he has $68 left. The amount left depends on the number of days that have passed. Well, every time we look at a word problem, we have to identify our variables. And in these, you have to figure out what's your x, what's your y. So remember, back when I taught you about functions, I said you should always ask in word problems one question. Ask yourself, what depends on what? The reason you want to ask that is because y always depends on x. Okay? In this case, I actually told you the dependence. I said the amount depends on the number of days. So the amount is y, and the number of days that have passed is x. So x, number of days, and y is the amount left. Okay, well, I was given my slope, and it asks me to write an equation, and that other information is not a starting amount. So I actually have to turn that into a point. And since I know, so my slope is actually -3 because he's spending money, not +3. So let me fix that. But we know that days is x and amount left is y. So that 1468 actually represents the point, 1468. All right. So now I need to write an equation for the situation. Well, if I have a point and a slope, then it should make sense to you that we're going to use point slope. All right, let me remind you, point slope is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. All right, so we just plug in our data. So y minus 68 equals -3 x plus 14. All right, now these are functions, and we usually like to write them in function form. So that means y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to actually put this in y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to distribute my -3, giving me -3x minus 42. I think that's 42. I'm sorry. It was minus 14. I put a plus. Made a little mistake there. Hopefully you caught me. So that becomes plus 42. And then I'm going to add the 68 to the other side. So it's going to be plus 68. And that's going to give me 10, so 110. So my equation is going to be y equals -3x plus 110. And there's my equation. Now that tells me something. He actually did start with $110 in his account, and he's spending $3 a day. Okay, so it says use your equation to find the amount he began with. My starting amount from our last video, we said our B is always our starting amount. So $110. All right, so that's when you're given a slope and a point, and you have to turn the data into a point. All right, but sometimes instead of giving you a rate, a word problem gives you 2 relationships at different points in times, and they don't give you something that represents a slope. So this kind of problem is giving you 2 points. You must find the slope and then use one of the points to write an equation. All right, so here's one. Biologists have found that the number of chirps some crickets make per minute is related to temperature. The relationship is very close to being linear. When crickets chirp 124 times a minute, it's about 68 degrees. When they chirp 172 times a minute, it's about 80 degrees. So we have to figure out what the variables are. So we're going to ask ourselves, what depends on what? Okay, so does the number of chirps depend on the temperature? So I'm going to write that out. Let's see. Number of chirps. Does that depend on the temp? Or does the temperature depend on the number of chirps? Well, it seems like the crickets chirp based on what the temperature is. So I'm going to say that the number of chirps depends on the temperature. So number of chirps would be my y, because y depends on x. So I'm going to let my temperature be my x, and the number of chirps be my y. Okay, so when they chirp 124 times a minute, it's about 68. So we'll say 68, 124. There's my first point. All right, when they chirp 172 times, it's about 80 degrees. So 80, 172. So now I have 2 points, but to write an equation of a line, the minimum you need is a point and a slope. So I have to find the slope. So I'm going to do change in y. So 172 minus 124, change in y over a change in x, or y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, all over 80 minus 68. All right, I'm going to grab my calculator. I'm going to do 172 minus 124. That gives me 48. And 80 minus 68 gives me 12. So my slope, it looks like, is 4. 172 minus 124, 80 minus 68, so 4. So I have a slope of 4. Now, if I'm going to write the equation and I have a point and a slope, I actually have 2 points, I'm going to use point slope. All right, so y minus, I'm going to use 124/68, so 124 equals 4 times x minus 68. Again, word problems, we really like to have them in function form, so that means y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to distribute my 4 to get this into y equals mx plus b. So 4x minus 68 times 4 gives me 272. I'm going to add 124 to both sides, and that's going to give me y equals 4x. 272 minus 124 gives me negative 148. Okay, so remember, x was temperature, y was number of chirps. The question now asks you, how warm is it when the crickets are chirping 150 times a minute? So that means I'm going to let y be 150. So 150 equals 4x minus 148, and I'm going to add 148, which gives me 298 equals 4x. I'm going to undo that x. I'm going to divide by 4 since 4 is being multiplied to it. So 298 divided by 4 gives me 74.5. So it's about 74.5 degrees when they chirp 150 times a minute. All right, now if you need to rewatch that, please, please, please do. All right, last one. Last one's the easiest one. It's when we are given a constant rate or speed and a beginning amount. These are the easiest ones. Why? Because we can write it in slope-intercept form. You just have to figure out what's your slope, the rate of change, and what's your y-intercept, so your beginning amount. So here's an example. An airplane 30,000 feet above the ground begins descending at the rate of 2,000 feet per minute. There you go. Assuming the plane continues at the same rate, the plane's height and minutes above ground are related to each other. Okay, so what depends on what? Does height depend on minutes, or does minutes depend on height? So I hope you're saying that height depends on minutes. And this would be my y, and this would be my x. So x would be my minutes. Little trick is time is usually always your x. And y would be your height. Okay, so what's my starting height? Remember, y equals mx plus b. B is my starting amount. So my starting amount in this case would be 30,000, And my rate of change, it's going down, it's descending. So my rate of change would be negative 2,000 feet per minute. So my equation then would be y equals negative 2,000 x plus 30,000 feet. Okay? All right, so then the question would ask you, use your equation to find the altitude. Altitude is just a geometric word for a height of the plane after 5 minutes. So that means we're going to let x be 5. All right, so y equals negative 2,000 times 5 plus 30,000. Okay, so that's going to give me y equals negative 10,000 plus 30,000. So y equals 20,000 feet. So after about 5 minutes, the plane is going to be at 20,000 feet. All right, guys, I know that was a little bit longer than normal, but that is how you can write equations from word problems using information. But remember, the most important part, set your variables. Ask yourself, what depends on what? Because y always depends on x. Have a great day.